Our week 11 power rankings are here. Is there too much parity in the NFL in which mediocre team through 10 weeks is poised to make a Super Bowl run?
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, and welcome in to another edition of Locked On NFL. He's Tony Wiggins. I'm James Rapien. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Today's show brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And Tony, let's dive right in. Power rankings. Because
let's go.
Normally we do it in the third segment. We're going to start right off with it because it's going to set the table for the entire show. Our week 11 power rankings are here. If you're watching on YouTube, boom, you see them. If not, that's okay. We're going to tell you them because the Kansas City Chiefs move from 3 to 1. To me, that's a no-brainer. The Vikings all the way up to number 2. The Eagles down to 3, followed by the Bills, Ravens, rounding out the top 5. And then 6 through 10 is the 49ers, the Dolphins, both rising up. The Bengals staying put after their bye, the Cowboys falling to 9, and the Jets staying put at 10. Tony, any thoughts on the first 10?
No, other than the fact that every single one of those teams in the first 10 is beatable. You know, a couple of weeks ago, we had 3 or 4 teams that we thought were heads and shoulders above everyone else. And then we had 4 or 5 teams that had a few little issues, like Tua had to come back, and the Bengals had to get back Jamar Chase, and Dak had to come back. And now we to me, what we have is, I don't know if we have more than 2 elite teams and then 2 or 3 or 4 very good teams after that. I think this is setting up for us to have somebody do what the Bengals did last year, your Bengals, and that is get hot, especially with this extra week. So we're 10 weeks in when we still got 7 games. It just, even though it's one game, it just feels like a long time for teams to really get their act together. I think we have some teams that are poised to get their act together and shake things up by the end of the season.
Yeah, I certainly think the window is open for that for some of the teams that I'm about to name as we go 11 through 21 here. The Seattle Seahawks falling to 11, the Titans 12, Tampa Bay Buccaneers 13. I'm going to say it again, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 13, a little foreshadowing for you. The New York Giants 14, the Los Angeles Chargers 15, followed by the Patriots, Commanders, and Packers, who they fell to 21 last week. They're up to 18 following their win. The Falcons and Cardinals round out the top 20, and the Rams, nightmare season for the Rams. They fall to 21.
Yeah, they fall to 21, and this is what's called selling your soul. They sold out for 1 Super Bowl. They have I don't think they have a first-round draft pick until 2057. But the thing is they did it for a reason. They're in a big market, big stadium. It's almost like George Steinbrenner came out of the grave and ran the Rams and said, "We're going all in because we're asking people to do a lot of stuff for this franchise, and we need to win a championship." And that's what they did. But now they're going to pay for it. And if they don't pay for it, if they don't fix it and start hitting some late round draft picks, they're going to still be in trouble. The Browns are another team. They're sitting at 22. They're getting Deshaun Watson back here in a couple of weeks. We'll see what that means. It could mean a whole lot if they can hold on. Detroit's 23. The Bears are 24. The Steelers are 25. Saints, Broncos, Jaguars are 26, 27, and 28. Colts are 29. Panthers, Raiders, and Texans round out the bottom 3, and the Raiders are the biggest disappointment in the NFL.
No doubt. No doubt about it. I mean, the Colts are still a disappointment, but the fact that Jeff Saturday and those guys beat the Raiders, I mean, where's the offense? This should be a team, even without Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow, this should be a team that scores points. They got Josh Jacobs and Derek Carr and Devontae Adams. They should score, Tony.
And the boy genius in Josh McDaniel, even though, I forgot, it's been about 15 years since he was a young guy. He's an older guy now, and you would think that he would have gotten this together. And they've really, really when you think about the fact that all of the turmoil they went through last year with John Gruden leaving or being, removed, and Rich Bisaccia and the special teams coach taking over, and how they galvanized themselves and made the playoffs, they actually have taken a step backwards with Josh McDaniel. And the luster is really worn off of him to the point where Mark Davis had to come out and give him a vote of confidence. And that's crazy at this point.
It is crazy. What to me, that is a bigger surprise than the Broncos, but the AFC West in general has been a disappointment outside of the Chiefs. And to me, the Broncos, as big of a disappointment as they are, I thought the Raiders, I was like, man, I think they figured it out. I think Josh McDaniels is going to do enough. I didn't know if he was going to be great, but I thought it would be good enough. But what we need to do, Tony, is talk about, because you said we went through the top 10 of those power rankings, and you said all of those teams are beatable. And so the word that comes to mind is parity. And is that good? Is that bad? Which teams could make a run? We're going to dive into that coming up next here on Locked On NFL. But first, a word from Turo, because Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget, from the US to UK to Canada, coming soon to Australia. Test drive a new electric vehicle you've had your eye on, which I've used Turo to do this when the Bengals played the Cowboys earlier this year. Thank you, Dallas, for that, because I got to test drive a little Tesla. It was a lot of fun. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Again, Turo.com, Turo.com.
All right, segment 2 here on Locked On NFL on a Wednesday with James Rapien and Tony Wiggins. James, we're going to get into this parity issue real quick. However, just recently released on the Locked On Sports Network is the fact that they have Bet Online, of course, one of our great sponsors, have released the odds to win the Super Bowl title this year. The Buffalo Bills are still at the top at plus 400. Kansas City's right behind at plus 5. Philly is at plus 525. The San Francisco 49ers are plus 750. It's a lot of parity, man. The difference between Buffalo and, let's just say, Dallas, who's down at like number 7, is not that much. And that means that there's parity in the NFL, real parity. People always talk about having parity until they get it. And then when they get it, they get angry that there's no David versus Goliath. There's no big dragon that you have to slay. I've always said that in sports, there's always been dominance. Whether you go back to basketball with UCLA and John Wooden, where you got the 5 best players in the country every single year, or Gino Auriemma in women's basketball. There's always been just this dominant team, the Yankees. You go through the Lakers. There's always been this thing. People act as if the lack of parity or the void of parity is like this harmful thing until they get it. And I'll give you an example. It was not a few years back, about a decade or so ago, there was parity in the NBA, and the worst finals ever was the Spurs and the Pistons. Nobody wanted to see it, but those are the two teams that quote unquote played the game the right way, right? And they weren't full of superstars that people thought were these guys dunking all over the place and everything. It was Tim Duncan. It was Mr. Fundamental. It was Larry Brown, and he was going, and nobody watched it. So the question is there too much parity in the NFL? And at some point, are we going to pay for it? And folks are going to be disinterested because there's no dragon to slay.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. One, the Pistons would have won that finals if Rasheed Wallace didn't leave Robert Horry in the corner in game 6. I believe it was game 6, because that was the one where it was 2-2. The Spurs crushed the Pistons the first 2 games, and the Pistons came back and crushed the Spurs the next 2 games. And then it's game 5, final game at Detroit. And you got to get it because it was the 2-3-2 format, which they no longer do. And the Pistons blew that game. They won game 6 and lost game 7. So history changes if Rasheed Wallace knew how to guard someone in the corner. Sorry, Rasheed. It's true. That said, yeah, to me, the Chiefs are clearly the best team in the NFL right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I watched the Bengals beat them twice last year. I watched the Bills beat them. They're certainly beatable. And so to your point, is there a juggernaut to root against? It would have been the Rams. That would have been the team if they had won and then they pull off a trade at the deadline, which they were trying to do, and they were negotiating. They were trying to get Burns from Carolina. Imagine if they had a winning record and then they get Burns, and just
ridiculous.
It would have been, they would have been the Darth Vader. They would have been the villain for everyone that isn't a Rams fan. But they haven't delivered this year. And so you're right. It's wide open. There is parity. There's also time for these teams to kind of separate themselves. Mm-hmm. And the team I cover and talk about every day, the Bengals, they're in the middle of this. They're 8th in our power rankings. But let's be honest, they're in like an 8-team cluster right now where they're not at the top of the league. And maybe they end up there, but they're certainly not at the bottom of the league, and they might just be mediocre. And some of these teams, they're going to have to start to separate themselves. And, the Chiefs have done that from the rest of their division, right? The AFC West, no one has shown up. The Chargers have been disappointing. 5-4, that's disappointing.
The Broncos are a mess.
A mess. And so, the Bucks, they're feeling better about themselves at 5-5, but, there's just been a lot of letdowns. And so I expect some of these teams to be who we thought they were coming into the year in the second half of the season. The Rams, I don't think they're going to be able to do that without Cooper Kupp. The Bucks, could they be one of those teams? Maybe. And I'll ask you and let you go in a second. The Seahawks, could they take a step back to reality now, where they might not be as good as we thought they could have been, right? And so that's the part where it's going to be interesting, because there's a lot of middle. And at some point, the middle has to separate. Otherwise, it's just going to be this ugly, weird, unique year where everyone's 9-8 or 8-9.
Well, what's weird is last year, the AFC West and the NFC West were probably the two best divisions in football because of the top to bottom parity, even though Seattle was a little bit off. The other NFC West teams, all of them are vying for playoff spots. And then AFC West, Denver was down a little bit, but everybody else was someone who could beat anybody. Now it's the different. We used to call the NFC East the NFC least. Not anymore, because all four of those teams are 500 or better, right? And we always just had the AFC East as a foregone conclusion. Well, now all of those teams are 500 or better. And if the playoffs started tomorrow, all 4 AFC East teams would make it, because New England would be the last wild card. That's wow to me. It is absolutely wow to me that there's that much parity. There's that much. I think some early season injuries have had an effect. Tua's injury had an effect. Jamar Chase has obviously had an effect. And now I believe the emergence of certain teams like Minnesota has totally thrown this thing into a loop, because I don't know anyone other than Randy Moss. I will say, I think he picked them to go. I did not evaluate that roster. And I'll give you credit. I think you even said, can they win the NFC West? And I mean the NFC North. And I said, no. So you were even on them a little bit, but I just didn't see it with them, with Mike Zimmer being removed and their defense being the way it was, and Rick Spielman trading away all those draft picks that he did. He traded a second-round pick for Yannick Ngakoue and then had recouped it like 6 weeks later for a third-round pick. I'm just sitting there thinking, like, there's no way that Minnesota's going to be good. And guess what? They're good, and Kirk Cousins is no longer the punchline for a bunch of jokes. So there's a lot of parity, and there's a lot of teams that are hanging around and got off to really good starts. The question is, and we're going to answer this one in segment 3. The question is are some of those teams that got off to late starts, or are some of those teams that are starting to get healthy, or that we anticipate are going to get healthy, some of the usual suspects, will they start showing up and knocking on the door? One of them I wrote off that I think you're going to talk about.
Yeah, I think you know which one I'm going to talk about. Today's show brought to you by LinkedIn, because these days every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you got to get to LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs is, well, they have, 1, it's free. 2, they have simple tools that are going to help you narrow down and find the right candidate for the position you're looking for. Screening questions that make it easy to focus on the right candidates. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
And today's show is sponsored and brought to you by betonline.net. It is your #1 source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Who knew that the Brooklyn Nets would fire Steve Nash and start actually playing some defense? I did, because Steve Nash isn't known for defense. But there's more that you can get at BetOnline. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts.
All right, Tony, there's a lot of teams in the middle, stuck in the middle. What teams could emerge and kind of take themselves out of the middle and vault themselves into contending status? I have to start with the team that you know. I knew
it was coming.
I'm bullish on. You really want to bury Tom Brady?
Yeah.
Not you specifically.
Actually, I did.
But a lot of people, hey man, Tom Brady, it's over. It's over for Tampa. He's over here boating and doing things and leaving and all this, and now he's got the off the field stuff, and him and his wife are no longer together, and they're divorced now, and oh my God. And you look up and they just go 2-0 against the Rams and the Seahawks.
Yep.
Might not be anything. Could be something.
Mm-hmm.
Their young running back emerges.
Yes.
And suddenly, and Rashad White in shows, hey, I can run for 100+ and be this pass catching threat that you need to be alongside Leonard Fournette. Because I think they still need Leonard Fournette, but having a reliable pass catch out of the backfield, how important is that for a Tom Brady offense? Cade Otton slowly emerging there at tight end for them. And then the usual suspects, whether it's Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. Godwin looking better and better. Bye week might help him a little bit more. And then the real point here, outside of you really want to doubt Tom Brady, I feel like we've done this way too long for people to still do it, and yet here we are. It's the division they're in. They're in first place at 5-5. They literally can be in the middle and then go on the road to what? Minnesota? Do you think Tom Brady is going to be scared to go to Minnesota, or really worried about having to go to Philly, a team they beat last year in the playoffs? I'm not saying that they're going to just suddenly go through all these, but you look at the top teams in the power rankings and the quarterbacks. Who's scary right now? Kirk Cousins, Jalen Hurts, Jimmy G. I'm just looking at NFC teams. Dak Prescott. Like, those are the teams that the Buccaneers are going to have to deal with. So bury them if you wish. Teams that in people that buried them. I still think that there's a shot that the Bucs can turn things around and not only win that division, which they're in position to do, but also make a postseason run.
Yeah, you're right. One I'm going to mention that is not going to surprise anybody. So I'll go AFC and NFC because my NFC choice is going to surprise you. AFC, Miami. And it's not really a surprise, but Miami's for real, man. They made trades, and Tua is an MVP candidate. And the only reason they're still ranked as low as they are in the power rankings is because Tua was injured for those few weeks, but they'd be a lot higher than that. And I believe everybody knows that they're coming in. They're a very dangerous team. The other one, I'm not going to count out Aaron Rodgers in the Packers yet. And the reason why I won't do it is why you looking? I know. I saw you. The reason. Listen. Here's the reason why. Here's the reason why I won't do it. All they needed was somebody to emerge, and Christian Watson showed up and got 3 touchdowns the other day. Okay, so they have this identity. They're going to put Aaron Rodgers. They're going to put Aaron Rodgers in the center, and they just. I gave them no shot against Dallas the other day, and because Dallas is defense.
Really? It's Dallas.
But it's their defense. But the thing is, man, I think they found an identity. And if you look at their schedule, if they can sneak in, The one time they won a Super Bowl, they won it as a wild card. If they can sneak in on the back end, they can be a problem for some people. I'm telling you, they could be. Look at you, man. I see you shaking your head around, man. Come on, you gotta give me. I'm just telling you. I'm going with you the same way you're going with Brady. I'm going with Rodgers, but I'm just saying, I'm going to give them a chance because they can really run the football.
Man,
they can actually cover on the back end. I'm giving Green Bay a shot.
I get why you'd say, "Oh, you're going Brady."
Those
Rodgers.
NFC, the NFC East teams are going to beat each other up. The NFC East teams are going to beat each other up.
I have 7 reasons why I'm more confident in my pick than yours.
You should be
7-1. That's why.
You should.
Tom
be
Brady
more
has as many rings with Tampa as Rodgers has with Green Bay. They have the same amount of Bay rings. Think about that.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Mm-hmm.
No, I could Green Bay sneak into the playoffs, maybe the NFC.
And I think they could be a problem for somebody. They could be a problem. They could absolutely be a problem.
Sure, we got Aaron Rodgers.
Yep.
Sure. Especially, and here's the thing. This is why I really can't. I can make faces all day.
And they didn't get blown out by anybody yet. I think they lost a lot of close games.
Well, I can't say you're wrong. Is because when you have a dude like Rodgers, like I've said it on Lockdown Bengals, when you have Joe Burrow, it can hide some of those flaws.
Yes.
And going into, and Rodgers obviously done it longer. Brady too. Going into Philly on the road in the postseason, they'll just be like, all right, LFG. Like that's what these quarterbacks do.
Exactly.
And so this idea that, the Vikings, dude, are you sure you would pick the Vikings against the Buccaneers right now?
No.
Are you sure you'd pick in a head-to-head the Vikings against the Packers? And I know the Vikings beat the Packers. Would you?
No.
It's tough when it's postseason football. So I'm not going to argue with you. I look, more times than not, the elite quarterback wins. Not always, right? Nick Foles can win a Super Bowl. It can happen.
Right.
But man, is that the outlier? That is the outlier. And so, we'll see what happens.
And believe it or not, I saw 2 games in a row. I watched the Packers game against Dallas, and then I watched the game with the Commanders and the Eagles. And old school coaches, and I'm old, you can see the gray in my beard, but old school coaches would have felt really good about this fact. At the end of the day, it started to get cold. The leaves have fallen off the trees. That, it's even a little chilly here in North Florida. I always talk about the weather. And teams decided that they were going to turn around and stick that ball in the belly of those running backs. Last night, the Commanders had 48 rushing attempts. That was more plays than Philly ran. And they beat an undefeated team. And I watched that the day after. The Packers just said, you know what? We're going to keep running this thing right down your throat. Y'all going to back Michael Parsons up and try to make him an off-the-ball linebacker because we're going to eliminate him as a pass rusher.
And what did the Bucs do? What did the Bucs do too?
They stuffed it right down. So my thing is all of this devaluing of running backs and all of these analytics and all of this new stuff, it has come down lately to a team that looks like, and look at Tennessee making a run, by the way, who's starting to be a problem for people. The teams that are able to turn around and hand that ball off, control the clock, demoralize the other team's defense, get them frustrated, and then make the offense desperate on the other side of the field. And that's what I'm going with. I also give the nod to the 49ers because the 49ers, now that they got that other running back and McCaffrey,
Elijah Mitchell.
That's right. They are starting to do the same thing. Mitchell actually had more carries than McCaffrey. And then they still got Deebo Samuel. Watch them too, because they're another team that can rush the passer and can run the ball on offense and won't put a whole bunch of stress on Jimmy G. So it's starting to feel like the old school teams, those middle of the road teams. I know we mentioned Miami, but other than Miami, the rest of these teams, they're trying to bust you in your mouth and control the clock. So that's why I'm going with those teams. And it just so happens that you pick the Bucs and I pick the Packers. Those are running teams with what? With great legendary quarterbacks that as soon as they get that going, guess what they're going to do to you? They're going to start carving you up. I'm telling you, it's a very, very dangerous time for all of these teams that like to throw it around a lot when you got those teams getting hot at this time who can run the football and have great passers who can hit you with play action and nitpick and keep those sticks going the other way. That's a bad omen for a lot of people.
To summarize, after 10 weeks of NFL football, we know nothing. It could go the exact opposite way, right? 5-5, Green Bay with 4 wins. The Bays, they could both be playoff bound. We'll see. Regardless, we're going to have you covered each and every day here on Locked On NFL. So subscribe on YouTube, follow wherever you get your podcasts. And for Tony Wiggins, I'm James Rapien, signing off for now on Locked On NFL.